Life is unfair. The world is unfair. People have been facing injustices since the beginning of time. Some people get preferential treatment for things for certain reasons, maybe based on their social status, their looks, their wealth, whatever. Things have always been like this, right? It's not like we can change the way human behavior operates because it's 2025. Well, some people think you can, or at least they try to shift the unfairness onto other parties and see like how you like it for a change, I guess is how you can look at a story like this. Because it turns out over in Oregon State, in the Pacific Northwest, they decided it was a good idea to just wipe clean over 47,000 people's eviction records overnight. So now it's just like as if they were never evicted ever before, which is going to highly increase their possibility and their chances of being able to rent a place now. Wow. So this new law in Oregon is supposed to set aside and seal past residential evictions that meet specific criteria. These sealed evictions will no longer appear in background checks, legally treated as if they never occurred. Wow, man. You know, I wish I could do a bunch of terrible things and then have it just be completely erased as if I never did it before. And then the only one who knows about it is me. Not a future landlord, not a future wife or girlfriend, nobody. How great would that be, right? If you could just get away with all kinds of terrible things and you never have to worry about the consequences of it. Sounds great. So their judicial department staff manually reviewed about 160,000 eviction cases that go all the way back to 2014. And this recent expungement of all of these eviction records represents the first phase of a broader effort to address housing challenges. So think about this for a minute. You are a tenant that hasn't paid the bill and you were evicted. So you intentionally stopped paying the rent, whether it was because of financial hardship or just because you didn't like your landlord. It doesn't really matter the reason. And then, because of a state law like this in Oregon, you go to apply for another place, and the next landlord thinks you're just a stand-up guy because they really like you, seem like a great person and all of this. They check your background, everything looks good. Okay, we'll rent to you, no problem. And now this person gets to go ahead and get away with this again. Sounds fantastic, huh? What a great place to be a landlord. Who would want to be signing up for this as a landlord, guys? Like, you know, that's why we have background checks and credit checks and all of this stuff. Like, if things can be hidden from these reports and, you know, parts of people's past can be erased, especially the worst parts, well, then what's the point? Why even have background checks or credit checks or anything for that matter? Because if half of it isn't going to be revealed, then it doesn't really serve a purpose. They say here that an eviction can affect a renter's ability to qualify for another rental and have downstream effects on homelessness and transitory housing arrangements, health, or employment. Yeah, no kidding. Maybe that's why you probably should have paid your rent to begin with. Maybe that's why you shouldn't have went through an eviction to begin with, right? Life has consequences. It's not like you can just do whatever you want and then suddenly think that everybody's just going to forgive you and forget. And guess what? This is just the beginning, okay? That's 47,000 eviction records that have been cleared so far, but the court has a backlog of about 50,000 more cases that are still going to be under a review, with the goal of completing all of those by the end of 2025, guys. So if you're a landlord in Oregon right now, I would be selling my investment properties because there is no way you can actually verify if you're going to be renting to a solid tenant anymore. You know, even with background checks, even with things checking out for people, sometimes it's hard to judge someone's character. Sometimes it's hard to know what's going to happen. Like, for example, I personally had to go through an eviction before as a landlord and evict one of my tenants for not paying the rent for at least a couple of months that he stopped paying, okay? And when I did the background check on him, It's not like he had evictions on his record. He didn't have the greatest credit, but he was making money and he seemed like a solid guy and he wanted the place. And so I figured, you know what, let's give him a chance. You know, worst comes to worst, I'll have to evict him, which ended up happening. You know, I like to give people the benefit of the doubt when they seem like they're going to be a good person, they seem like they're going to pay on time. You know, you want to help people. That's part of what being a landlord is. But long story short, ended up having to evict this guy, and he was smart enough to actually leave before the eviction was official, before he actually had to get kicked out and come to court and all of that. Because once he got served the notice that he has to appear in court for his eviction hearing, that's when things got real for him. And he said, okay, don't worry, I'm gonna leave. And he did. And that was the best thing for everybody because I didn't have to follow through with the full eviction proceeding and go longer without collecting rent on this property. And it was great for him because he now doesn't have that eviction on his record. So it was a win-win for everybody. But think about it. When somebody carries an eviction to term, specifically the tenant, you know, they know fully what they're doing. They're served papers by the sheriff. They're required to appear in court for their eviction hearing. It's not like they're clueless that they're being evicted. They know that they're not paying or breaking some other term of the lease that's causing the eviction. So the tenant is not innocent in this. So why are these people getting these records cleared? This is just criminal, if you ask me, guys. Yeah, does it lead to homelessness? Does it lead to people falling down on your luck if you make poor decisions in life? Absolutely. Can we save all these people? Definitely not. But according to the state of Oregon, they're trying to. And then guess what? Moving forward, the state courts will automatically set aside eligible cases, creating a more streamlined process for record clearing. Oh, that's great. Why don't you just start clearing off, you know, murder records and rape records and all other kinds of things too, because nobody needs to know about that. Doesn't matter if you're a convicted sex offender. Who cares? But you see where I'm going with this? Like, it's just so crazy that, you know, people are able to now get away with things this serious, because getting evicted is definitely serious. Otherwise, they wouldn't be erasing it if they didn't think it was a serious offense. And then landlords are out there basically defenseless, and you don't even know who you're renting to. And it's tough being a landlord, guys. It's so tough that I decided to get out of the game. A little over a year ago, we sold our last investment property. Haven't been a landlord now in a little over a year, and honestly, it's been great. It's been great not having to deal with the extra problems that come up. It's nice not having to keep all these extra records and documents and all of that. Able to cash out, you know, make some money on these properties that we owned, and live happily ever after for now. Until the next best opportunity comes up, I'm fine just sitting and waiting and earning interest on my money. But this is very worrisome because I wonder how many other states are going to follow suit and start doing the same thing. For now, it's just Oregon, but by the end of the year, you're going to have over 100,000 people there, you know, basically cleared. And that's a lot of people being evicted, by the way, too. That's a lot of people that are essentially hiding the fact that they weren't paying their bills to their next landlord, guys. And what about, say they want to go buy a house? That's not going to show up either to the lender. If they're in the position to actually do so, then these people could potentially be getting a loan for a house that they shouldn't actually be qualified for. So if this doesn't define the system being broken, I don't know what is. It sounds like they're getting so desperate over there, so tired of dealing with the homeless situation, that they're just saying, you know what, screw it. We're just going to let people, you know, pretend like nothing ever happened, and the landlords can take their chances. We just want them off the street. Here we have a house that was purchased back in 2005, so at least it's not a flip, for $750,000. And then they initially listed it for sale in 2019 for $1.7 million. Ended up actually lowering the price all the way down to $1.3 during the pandemic back in 2020. But then the property was taken off the market, right? But back in 2023, it was then relisted for $2.8 million, guys. $2.8 million. And now fast forward to today, the price is down to $2.1 million, and it's listed for $12,000 a month for rent. You know, I see houses like this sometimes, and it's like, you know, on the one hand, wow, these people are like, you know, good thing we didn't sell for $1.3 million in 2020, because now our house is worth way more than that, right? Well, it's only worth more if you can actually get someone to pay, because, you know, going from 2.8 million down to 2.1 million is a pretty big miss in terms of what the house is actually worth. So what is that house actually worth? Does anybody have any clue? You know, people ask me this sometimes, like, well, Michael, why don't you tell us what you think the house is worth? Like, the reality is, it's hard to know what a house like that is actually worth, because you can look at all the comps around here, but these houses are all so unique and so different that it's really only worth whatever the next buyer's willing to pay for. That's how much any piece of property is worth. You know, if I had to guess off the top of my head, it's probably only worth maybe 1.5 to 1.7 million. So they're still off by a pretty penny, asking 2.1 today. And that's just a guess off the top of my head, thinking what a reasonable buyer would probably pay for that home in today's housing market environment. And speaking of the housing market, we had pending home sales fall 5.5% in December, guys. This market just continues to slow. You know, the big news for a while now has been that home sales are at 30-year lows in terms of transaction volume. That's been the case for quite some time now, but it just continues to get worse, you know. Pending home sales down 5.5% as of the most recent reading, and this is across all 4 regions of the United States. The West, the South, the Northeast, and the Midwest, they're all seeing slowdowns in terms of the homes going under contract. Now, December is typically a pretty slow month, okay? But this is a year-over-year decline, okay? This is not like it slowed down from November to December. This is 5.5% down from the previous December. So, you know, as bad as December usually is, it's even worse this past year. And this recent information just kind of confirms what we've been saying here on the channel, that this market is not going to improve anytime soon, guys. How could it? How can anything improve? How are you going to see more people out there buying and transactions go up unless affordability, you know, improves in a major way? It's probably not going to happen anytime soon. Are we on our way there? Are we seeing affordability start to improve in some markets? Yes, but we got a long way to go before it becomes nationwide. And this is becoming apparent by what home sellers are having to resort to in order to get homes sold. Because what we're seeing right now is more and more home sellers resorting to using concessions in order to get the home sold. And in case you don't know what a concession is when the seller covers certain costs associated with the purchase of a home. It can make the home purchase more accessible for buyers and reduces their upfront costs. And seller concessions are often used in markets where buyers have more negotiating power, or when the seller needs to stand out in a competitive environment, which is becoming more and more the norm in more markets across the country. As inventory piles up, sellers are now starting to have to compete to get that home sold. A lot of places are seeing inventory levels rise back to where it was before the pandemic, guys. And the big ace in the hole that all these sellers had for the last few years has been low inventory, right? There's not many choices, so take it or leave it. Buyers are going to have to compete to buy the house. Now, the situation is flip-flopping. Buyers are disappearing, and what's happening is the sellers are starting to have to compete to get the home sold. We're seeing the complete opposite thing happen that we saw just a couple of years ago. I'll give you some real-world examples here of what sellers are actually doing to get homes sold right now, because 24% of sellers nationwide in 2024 offered a concession to get the home sold, which was actually less than it was in 2023 at 33%. So you could say, well, things are moving in the favor of sellers. Well, not really. It's just that we saw fewer home sales in 2024, so naturally you're going to have to see less sellers offer concessions, and also more motivated sellers don't have to offer concessions, because what they're doing is they're just offering the property at the right price from the beginning and getting it sold ASAP, so there's no reason to offer a concession. So one common type of concession that sellers are giving, especially for first-time home buyers or people that don't have a lot of money to put down towards the house, is they are giving credits for closing costs. This is something that we've typically seen sellers give in normal markets as well. It's almost becoming mandatory if you're trying to sell to a younger couple and this is the only offer you have. Well, if they only have money for the down payment, they don't have all the money for the closing costs, and you want to sell, looks like you might be footing the bill. Also, another popular seller concession right now is 2-1 buy downs, which is when the seller will pay to reduce the buyer's mortgage rate by 2 percentage points for the first year and 1 percentage point for the second year. And after those 2 years, the buyers are on the hook for the full mortgage amount that they agreed to when they signed the closing papers. And a lot of people who signed up for this deal a couple years ago thought, oh, well, I'm going to do this, and by the time, my mortgage rate comes full swing, I'll be able to refinance. Well, everybody who thought that a couple years ago is in for a rude awakening now for 2 reasons. One, because if you bought a couple years ago, there's a high probability that your property now is worth less than what you actually paid for it, so you can't refinance. And even if you're one of the lucky ones that saw some appreciation during this time frame, interest rates haven't changed. They're still in the mid 7s right now. So you're not going to be refinancing if you have an interest rate, in the high 6s or the low 7s. There's no incentive to refinance. This is something that the home builders have been doing for a long time now with these rate buy downs, and a lot of them are even giving permanent lower and reduced mortgage rates in order to incentivize a sale right now. In fact, I talked about this in a video the other day. If you want incentives to buy a house, guys, buy a brand new house, because you're not going to find a better set of incentives anywhere than in the new construction market right now. Another concession that sellers are giving today are home repair concessions. A lot of buyers, they want a turnkey home. And for example, there was a transaction right here in Miami where they did the inspection on the house and they found out that the house needed a new roof. And get this, the new roof was going to cost $120,000. The sellers were in a position where they either needed to give a credit at closing or they needed to reduce the price by that $120,000. And the buyer was very smart, and I'm so glad when I read this that the buyer chose a lower purchase price, because heads up for anybody, whoever is in this position, if you are in the position to either get that credit at closing or to get the purchase price lowered, always choose the lowest purchase price, guys, because everything that you pay is based on your purchase price. Your future property tax bill, based on your purchase price. Your mortgage interest, based on your loan amount, ultimately how much you're borrowing. The fees you pay for your mortgage at closing, also based on the purchase price and the loan amount. So you definitely always want to choose the lower purchase price rather than a credit at closing if you have the choice, because that's always going to benefit you at the closing and in the long run, owning that property at a lower property tax basis. But really, smart sellers, what you need to do is you need to make the repairs before you even list your home on the market for sale, because a lot of buyers today, they don't want to deal with problems. And so if you are going to sell a house that has lots of problems, be prepared to lower the price substantially when all of these problems are discovered during the inspection period. And we actually have another house for sale right here that's right across the street from the first one we looked at earlier. This house, on the other hand, though, is asking $4.5 million right now. They started off asking almost $5 million, had to cut the price by $500K, still no takers, guys. So, these houses are just gonna pretty much sit here forever, and no one's gonna buy them until the prices become realistic. Like, a lot of people see these prices in my videos and think, oh, that's insane. Well, you're right, it is insane. So insane to the point where the houses don't actually sell, guys. So all these listings here are great examples of how a seller can ask whatever they want for their property, but it doesn't mean you're gonna sell it. In fact, I would even write these 2 listings off as not even real listings. If you have a listing sitting on the market for a year or longer and no activities taking place, I consider that a dead listing, guys. It might as well not even be listed, because no one's interested. No one's buying that home. So it would make no difference of whether or not that home is on the market or not, because it's as if it weren't. Now, some people are in such bad shape right now when it comes to being able to afford their home, specifically if you make $50,000 a year or less right now. If you're in the lower spectrum of income in America, paying for your living expenses is more difficult than it has ever been. As of the December CPI report, the cost of shelter was up 4.6% year over year, and since that's based on the CPY, we know that it's pretty much double that, and it's probably more like 9 or 10% year-over-year increase. They're saying that 74% of Americans right now who earn less than $50,000 a year are regularly struggling to afford their mortgage or rent payments. This is according to Redfin. And the sacrifices that people have to make in order to keep a roof over their head is huge right now. 24% of Americans in this income bracket have had to skip meals to afford their rent or their mortgage, and 23% have had to resort to selling their belongings just to keep a little extra money on hand for these payments. 21% of people have also skipped or delayed medical treatments in order to free up some cash for their rent or their mortgage, guys. So what you can see here is not only are people in the lower income bracket suffering, they're willing to sacrifice pretty much any other type of expense in their life in order to keep a roof over their head. You know, losing your home, regardless of whether you rent or you own, is a last resort for basically everyone. I know it would be for me too. And this kind of circles back to what we were talking about at the beginning of this video with all of these evictions being cleared off of people's records. The best thing to do is to never get evicted. And obviously if you're in this $50,000 below income bracket, you probably have a much higher chance of being evicted than somebody in a higher income bracket. But there are things you can do, guys. You can try to negotiate your rent downward if you are a renter. Landlords don't like vacancies. You know, vacancies cost a lot of money. Turnover costs a lot of money. And if you tell them what's going on and they can still make an okay profit, even lowering the rent for you a little bit, you'd be surprised they might say yes. You know, if you're actually a homeowner, what you can do is you can contact your lender. You can see if you're able to do a loan modification. Not the most ideal thing to do, especially with where interest rates are at today. But if it makes a difference of lowering your payment a few $100s a month to make it more affordable until you can sort of increase your income level, then it might be the best thing to do for you. The best thing to do, if you can, regardless if you're renting or owning your own home, is to downsize. You know, move to a cheaper, more affordable place is really going to be your best bet if you're able to. But I think the best way to handle these problems in general is you need to increase your income, guys. You need to find ways to make more money, because really you're just going to be playing whack-a-mole for the rest of your life with expenses if you're constantly trying to keep up with the ever-rising cost of living. Because in case you're not paying attention, nothing is getting cheaper, you know? Everything's getting more expensive, and that's going to be how it will be indefinitely. We're not going to see anything get cheaper. You might see home prices come down a little bit. You might see car prices come down a little bit. You're going to see some relief in some areas, but overall, life is going to remain expensive. Food's not going to get cheaper. Gas, insurance, electricity, all that stuff's not going to get cheaper, and we need all that stuff too. But really, the best thing to do is to avoid ever getting evicted to begin with, kind of like the Tenant story I told earlier in this video. You know, if you are facing eviction, you don't want this on your record, guys. And if you live in a state besides Oregon, it's going to be on your record. So unless more states start doing this and start absolving people of their eviction reports, I would be concerned about this. You don't want to end up in that situation, because look, they're getting rid of this from people's records. Why? Because after they get evicted, they can't find another place to live. That's why they end up homeless and on the street, or basically desperate and in financial dire straits, because there's no other solutions. No one will take them. And I don't blame them. If you're a landlord, would you want to rent to somebody who's already been evicted? Of course not. Nobody wants to. So instead, the courts are cheating the system and making it unfair now towards landlords, and making it so that way they don't know if their potential tenant has been evicted in the past or not, which is a problem. So landlords, you need to be on the lookout for these deadbeat tenants, because they are going to be increasing according to what's going on here. And if you're a tenant, do the right thing. Don't be a deadbeat. Pay your bills. If you can't pay, move somewhere else where you can afford to pay. Move in with friends, family, a roommate, somebody. Do the right thing, guys. Not enough people doing the right thing out there anymore. So if you enjoyed this video, make sure you subscribe to the channel. And if you don't want to wait for my next video to come out, check out this one on the screen right over here, and I'll see you in the next one.